Oh,
Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone wherever you are. It's morning here in I guess Eastern Standard Time, just north of Toronto where I am, and still where my wonderful guest, A.M. MAWHINEY, is a bit up north. Yeah, it's fantastic to see you again, A.M. Thank you so much for joining me on Six Elementals. Please say hi to everyone and introduce yourself.
so hello, everybody. I'm about 3 hours north of where PL lives. My name's A.M. MAWHINEY, and I'm from Sudbury, Ontario, Canada, which is in the Canadian Shield. It's historically post-contact um, nickel mining company town. um, and has a history of very serious land degradation of about 100 years. Like there was nothing here but bare rocks. Um, and in the late 70s to early 80s, the whole community came together with town gown, volunteers, kids, older people, um, and we forged a path forward. And we're now, after 40 years, filled with green trees, and our acid filled lakes have vibrant health. And that history inspired my two books, because I am an author, obviously talking with PL, of two speculative science fiction books. The first one's called Spelldrifts, and the other one is called Spindrifts. Um, I can hold that one up because I reread it over the last week to revisit the characters because I was missing them. Um, so that's what you need to know about me right now.
Thank you so much. And I can say both those books are marvelous. I've read them both, and the other one is actually loaned out to a friend, Smudger. So um, uh, it's so fascinating to hear you speak about where you live, some of the challenges and the triumphs that have occurred there, and how that's inspired your work. Um, Yet, it's funny for me. I feel that a lot of people aren't aware of some of those challenges facing communities like that. I know sometimes we can get a bit myopic down here in the big city areas, and forget about that there are changes taking place to the earth that we don't necessarily see in the same way that you would experience where you are,
Mm-hmm.
and clearly that's inspired your novel. But what I pluck out of what you said is that lots of challenges, but yet ultimately a lot of successes and a very hopeful a hopeful outcome. Is that specifically part of the element of your writing?
Yes. Um, the two books I wrote, and actually the one I'm working on now, although it's not part of a Drift series, talk about climate change and what's happening with the planet, or what could happen, because the current publications are futuristic. One takes place about 50 years from now, the other one about 70 years from now. Um, and there's lots of intensity around what to do about the environment in which my stories take place. It requires a lot of creativity on my part, um, and how it gets resolved varies from book to book. But there are resolutions that probably will always leave threads unsolved, because you can't have a perfect world.
I understand that, and certainly what I found in reading your books is yes, of course, the world wasn't perfect. I wouldn't describe it as utopian. I would describe it as very positive, and a lot of there were a lot of uplifting things I found in your book, but there were still, I think, what I loved about your writing was that um, the humans were very much still humans, and they had their faults and their flaws, and that we all understand that we do. And yet, what I loved about your books the most was the sense of family, the sense of community, the sense of really striving together for a common goal. You know, understanding what the bigger picture is, that it's about saving our planet. Over anything else, but what I loved about both Spindrifts and Spelldrifts was that they were novels. They were novels about different generations and how they interacted, and how sometimes they clashed with each other, different viewpoints. How one generation felt they were more progressive than the other, and perhaps the older generation felt that some more traditional values should be adhered to, and providing advice and wisdom and guidance. And how did you address this in your books, and what made you want to write books where that transcended generations, with different characters, passing on, and new characters emerging? What made you want to include that aspect in your novels?
Well, it's kind of interesting. First, just to position the quick writing background, I was a creative writer all the way through high school. When I entered the work world, it all dried up. Then, during the first lockdown, I was going a little nutty, and with the confinement, and sat down at my computer, and the first sentence of the first book came out. I had no clue whether I could do it, but I thought, well, it'll keep me busy. And I'm past retirement age. I've been retired for 8 years, so people can see how long the gap was. And when I first started to write, I needed a place of hope. So the place is called Land of Hope. Um, and it was very utopian and idealistic, and the characters were wooden. I, you know, and then I realized this isn't going to work. And I started to hear these voices of things that I found very jarring happening, and I resisted, and then eventually they're in the book. The intergenerational part of the book, I think, is pretty much tied um, to my own family life growing up. We spent our summers at a log cabin that my grandfather built with my great grandfather. It was tiny. My grandparents were there. My uncle, who was my age, was there. And I have three sisters, and eventually we were all there. And then this was the community where my grandmother had grown up, and all of her siblings, my great aunt and great uncles, were around. So we were visiting their farms, and like there was a great feeling of intergenerational family. We stayed, eventually, my grandparents moved up the lake, but those experiences really connected with me. And somehow I just felt the importance of having characters who had been at the beginning of the Earth Project, and in fact, the people who developed the Earth Project, down to the youth. These were four generations, and it was pretty challenging to think through the years and sort of keep it consistent with their ages. But I wanted to go from the pioneers to the ones who picked up the baton, the ones that then brought the youth into the picture. And then, of course, much of the story is what are these youth heading for, and what are they going to contribute to the Earth Project. It's a world where everybody is expected, all over the planet, is expected to focus on some aspect of healing the earth. And it involves science and arts. And the second book involves magic, and a dragon and a magical wolf. They're very two different versions of the future. But in Spelldrifts, the four generation family came out of my own family experience.
Oh, that's wonderful. It sounds like clearly you had some wonderful family experiences, and it was very heartwarming to read about. I loved reading about that aspect. Also, just picking on the topic of youth, and you did note what the expectations were of youth, but also still within those expectations, there were still choices, right?
Yes.
So the youth still had choices available to them what path they want to pursue. What were you trying to say with all that about today and today's youth, and what perhaps is expected out of those who are going to carry this planet forward in the future, and the importance of the choices that our youth are making?
I'm really inspired by young people today because consistently they're fighting for their world. And they have very articulate ways of expressing that. In my own family, I, a few years ago, converted for heating from an old boiler system to a combination of heat pumps and a very high energy backup system with a furnace. Um, Again, boiler system. And it was a cold day, and out the front window is when the furnace in the basement kicks on, there's lots of vapor that comes out because it's all water, right? And then 10, the older granddaughter says, "Oh, I see you're spewing garbage into my environment." And I thought, oh boy. And I said, "It's vapor. It's like it's steam." And she kind of looked at me and she went, "Oh." And there have been similar kinds of comments, not so much about me. Um, they're also, the two of them, the one's 2 years younger, very engaged in the political decisions that lead to a better planet versus the ones that don't. So they're very curious before every election who I'm going to vote for, and they just represent hundreds of thousands of young people that are saying we have to change and we have to make a difference. And they're doing it all in different ways, inconsistent ways with their interests, but they're really clued into the enormity of what has to happen for them as adults and for the generations that follow.
Very well said and agreed. Our children, our young people are our future. They are brilliant. They are dynamic. They have so much to offer, and we're in their hands, right?
Yeah.
We're in their hands. Of course, you counterbalance that with some of the wisdom and experience of the older generation, and
Mm-hmm.
what they bring to the table, and learning from certain lessons that you can only gain through a life lived, and experienced. What was the commentary about that in your novels?
Well, I'm a retired university professor, and in my career, the university where I worked had lots of space for Indigenous education for everybody and for Indigenous students, starting in the early 80s. And I was really privileged to work at times alongside of some of the leaders of the indigeneity, and was invited to elder sessions and circles. And so, and then I had two great grandparents into my 20s. I had grandparents who lived till I was middle aged. And I learned so much from them. They were all very different in different knowledge areas, but I still hear some of their teachings that have affected my life quite substantially. Um, so, having been around older people a lot, um, I knew that I could create characters that were inspirational for the younger people. Um, Granny was a little bit of a control freak until Fania confronted her about it, and she didn't like it too much, but she did show progress in, getting people more involved in a collective way. Um, so again, I think it was inspired through personal experiences in my family and in my work life.
Yes, and that truly came out to me in reading your books, and with that, and for me, I also recently, in especially my last book, I made that time jump so you could see a bit more about the future generations and what they were gonna bring to the table. I feel like there's a craft, and you do it so exceptionally well in writing that those sort of time jumps with generations, younger people coming into young adulthood, and people from middle age transitioning into older age, and what that whole dynamic means. And I feel that again, you did it so adeptly that what I love that you captured is that it's not necessarily going to be a smooth transition. It's not necessarily going to be not fraught with some, like I said, I was laughing to myself listening to you talk about you know um, you know someone, having your family member saying, hey, you're ruining my planet, my atmosphere, right? And
Yeah.
and but I think but ultimately, though, there's still a sense of harmony between these generations that you depict. There's still a sense of continuity. And as you know as well, I have written about essentially some indigenous issues, especially in my third book. And I feel that the indigenous people of our land in Canada, we do them a great disservice in not paying more heed to some of the lessons that they are teaching us. Was any of that conveyed in your book?
It was, and I felt the need to be subtle about it and to respect the boundaries as a non Indigenous person. Um, and one of the struggles I had with the first book was picturing 50 years from now, I couldn't picture our lands, like where we live, um, still with the colonialist model. And yet, I wondered if it was my place to shift the political leadership in a direction that gave me a sense of what would be right. It's speculative. Um, and I really struggled with it to the point where I thought, if I can't bring that aspect in, I don't want to write this book. I don't want to write this book with the kind of hierarchical marginalization structures that we have right now. I want to see some reparation and reconciliation, having had happened when I project 50 years and 70 years into the future. I struggled with it, and I did present certain passages to an Indigenous colleague and friend who, certainly was not speaking for everybody, because I suspect there's some controversy, although I tried to adhere to proper boundaries. And she was very encouraging and thoughtful in her feedback, and gave me some editing that she thought would help. So, as you know, because you've read it, the world reflects a different political economic system that even changes more between the first and second book. And the leadership is more in tune with what I understand to be traditional Indigenous ways of operating. It's about consensus, it's about collaboration, it's about people with certain talents taking leadership in those talent areas. But like a circle, the respect of the diversity and the ability of people to think and act in different ways and yet come together was important to me, because I learned a lot about that in my contacts at work.
Oh, that's amazing. And I think in that, when I think about that, when I pull on that thread as well, I feel that, in Spelldress specifically, you, and I think I mentioned this in my review, that you seem to have more clear like heroes and villains
Yeah.
Than its predecessors. More definitive conflict, like there's factions that are trying to like actively undermine this positive momentum that was I saw that through Spindrift, that was accomplished in Spindrifts. And I say about this about both your books that I've read so far. The real hero is humanity basically collectively striving towards realizing how great it can be. And then the antagonist is our propensity for being selfish and, lack of commitment to sustain change and to protecting the environment and all our inner conflicts and our greed, whether that's corporate greed, but like we're the hero, but we're also the enemy. And, but we're capable of doing so much. Like, are we on the path to achieving all this, or are our worst impulses and natures going to destroy us, going to destroy the planet? I think some people would say the jury's still out. I think some people would say, oh no, we're going to make it. And some people would say, no, we're not. How do you feel, AM, about all this? How do you feel? We're going to make it. I saw on the news last night. I saw they were talking about the super glacier, and that it is supposed to be, in a few centuries, it's going to melt and potentially flood all our coastal cities and put us another 10 feet. Our sea level is going to rise potentially another 10 feet. But so it's easy to succumb to doom and gloom, but But are we going to make it? Are we going to come out on the right side of this?
So in the first book, they talk about we're getting close to the tipping point. And the book is 50 years from now. And I started to write it in March 2020. And I have to say that I think we're at the tipping point right now. And there's a huge backlash all over the world against what some of us see as progress towards a different, better world. There are people that say, no, that's not the better world. Um, I'm trying to avoid political language right now that we're all hearing. But they want um, a more historical version of the world. And I think we're seeing it played out at a whole bunch of different levels on issues related to how do we get from oil and gas economy to something else? How do we transition from our current energy use to something else without having horrible impact on the economy through job loss and everything? And there are paths forward to it. Um, Helping people transform their skills to new skills, and horrendous resistance to all of those things. So, in all of the social, economic, and corporate aspects of our world and environmental aspects, I believe we're at a tipping point. And it is too soon to tell, but I'm sure within 2 years we'll know which path we're going to be on. Are we going to be on the path that replicates the past? Are we going to be on the path and holds on to what's already, quite major in our worlds? Or are we on a path that moves us in a direction that for sure the younger generation is insisting we go down? Um, Young people are so much more engaged in environment, in politics, in the things they're protesting and taking action on, and even the kinds of careers they're picturing for themselves, all tied to where they want to see the world go. And I think within, okay, I'll obfuscate a little bit, 2 to 5 years, we'll know what path we're on.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think we will. And clearly, you're in your books, and where I was leading to all this is in your books. We make it, right. It's the optimistic view. It's the positive view. It's a view that I think a lot of us hope for. But of course, in literature, there's many books where we don't make it, and things don't go well. And there's a place for those too, I think. How do you feel about that in terms of literature? That the importance of having books where we do and where we don't make it, and as the cautionary tales, and the ones where kind of uplifting, inspiring, showing us that it's not too late to turn things around, etc. How do you feel about both those viewpoints in literature and the value of both of those?
So I am currently reading Anne Smith Nukasak's River Faces North. And it's the first book of a trilogy. And it is a very grim view of a future that is very realistic as a possibility. That would be where we're heading, depending on which path we follow. Spindrifts and spelldrifts is the other path to a certain extent. And I'm just so immersed. I had to stop reading it for a week to read my book to kind of get ready in case you ask detailed questions, because I was so immersed in River Faces North that I couldn't remember much about my books. Um, her development of the characters, the world building is just incredible and very possible. And we're seeing signals of that at the same time that we're seeing signals of a more hopeful future. So I read both. Um, but I must say it depends on where I am myself. I can I can thoroughly enjoy the horror of the negative stories when I'm feeling secure about the world. Um, but I certainly do appreciate the optimistic ones as well. I read a book a couple of months ago called The Briar Club, and the author's well known, but it just escapes me right now, like it always does. And it is describing the past in the 50s in the States. And it's a lot about race. And it's a lot about somebody who comes along who's a politician, a very charismatic politician. And it's spooky that this person wrote this a few years ago and captured so much of what we're seeing happening now. Um, but the historical stuff was really grim to read because I know the history of slavery, and I know the history of the uh, rights movement, but this gets characters that you love, and then you hear what happens. And so it was very grim to read it, but fascinating and important for people to read. Um, so I can go both ways, but I try to spread them out a little bit.
Yeah, no, I understand, and I think when
Oh,
it comes
excuse me. That book was Southern Man. It wasn't The Briar
Southern,
Club.
oh, Southern men, okay,
Southern Man. The Southern Man.
the Southern
It
men.
takes place in the southern states. The Briar Club was about women's rights, which was also interesting.
Yeah, and I feel we do need both. I feel that that lightness dark combination is really important in our literature. Um, I know that I aim for that in my
Mm-hmm.
work. I aim for, but I always say, and I say this, AM, about my own work to relate back to yours. I find that, and I said this actually last night. I was on a podcast. I find there are some things that you would think people don't have as much of a tolerance for, but yet seems to be more acceptable than like. In other words, I think people find it easier to read some battle scene where people are beheaded and eviscerated than they are prepared to hear about racism and homophobia and sex. I think sometimes those things are so much more unpalatable, and that the sensationalism of a battle scene is one thing, but then to hear someone say something horrible about someone else because of their gender or their race, it seems to be well. And I always wonder, what is it about our human nature that allows us to do that?
Yeah.
And I think that when it comes to what you write, I think sometimes it's harder to hear that we're destroying our planet. And if we don't do these things, we're going to destroy our planet versus other catastrophes and
Yeah.
seeing them happen, right? I wonder why that is. Do you have any idea why? do you think?
That's a hard question, but I suspect that one aspect is the way we entertain ourselves has been through television and movies, and before that, radio, of battles. And I think we get a little bit used to reading detective novels, people dying, mass people dying. At one point, many years ago, somebody figured that, 10-year-olds had seen an astronomical number of murders or people dying just through television and movies. And so, to a certain extent, it's possible that we're just a little bit used to that. Um, and things that are more personal that really were tabooed to depict in movies and on TV too much. We're like, it's sort of like I don't want to see it. The people who experience it certainly more than see it, they experience it. But for a lot of people, primarily white people, when it comes to race, they don't want to go there, and that's a mistake. If they see it, they should go there, in my opinion. And it's the same thing with gender and sort of the still patriarchal tendencies that we see in our world, despite a lot of um, apparent progress. Certainly, um, I was a woman, I did very well in my career, but there were moments when things were said and actions of silencing or other kinds of behaviors that made it very clear that I didn't know my place as a woman. Um, so I think some of that is more challenging for people to see what they do that contributes to those kinds of behaviors. And also, even if they do see it, it's much harder to figure it out. Watching a war movie, that seems far away to a lot of us, especially in North America. Other places are living it and see the reality of that rather than the glorification of it. And we don't get to connect with that in many parts of the world as viscerally as our soldiers do and the people living in those war zones do, obviously. And even when it's being depicted, people can turn away or shut it off rather than saying, no, I really need to understand this. When I was growing up through school, we didn't talk about gender. We didn't talk about gender identity, except in the schoolyard when people used it as a slur. Um, we did not have conversations about that at all. Um, so people had to hide who they were. It's hard to hide the color of your skin, but when it came to gender identity, people had to live two lives. And when I became aware of this, and I was like in my 20s, about the duality of living as a person who isn't heterosexual, I kept thinking there's something really wrong with our world, that people can't be their authentic self. And now, when it's more acceptable, there are factions saying that's woke and want it to stop. And I think when somebody called me woke because of my books, I thought, but woke's just another term for being progressive and wanting people to thrive. I'll wear the label of woke with pride. Thank you very much. Um, and would reclaim it to mean something positive rather than the put down they intended to be. Um, in fact, in my new book, I have a scene where one of the characters actually says about what I just said, because they were accused of being woke in a debate. Um, it's complicated, and it's really hard to figure out how to unravel those threads and reknit them into something where everybody is safe and everybody can thrive. Um, because there's so much disrespect still in our world.
Yeah, and sadly that is true. But you know, people like yourself make it a better place. So that's a plus. Can you tell us a bit about your what I know you can't give away everything, but can you tell us a bit about your new book? What you have planned? Um,
It's been a wild ride. um, I'm a pantster, as you know. Um, I sit down and I never know what's going to come out of my head and into my fingers. And sometimes it's not even in my head. And I think, where did that come from? In this one, I am having to think through a few things. It starts out September 2024 when 4 students, and the story takes place primarily in British Columbia, for a reason that I can explain in a minute. They're called to a teacher's classroom at the end of the day. And it opens with somebody running late and thinking she's in trouble and the teacher's going to give them consequences, but she doesn't know what she did. And it turns out the schools decided they're going to engage in a new kind of debate club that would compete against other places. Now, I don't know a lot about debate. That wasn't anything in my schooling. So I've been doing a lot of research, and I decided it's a new kind because I have to, for one scene, I have to break proper protocol. Um, 2 of the characters know each other. They grew up in the community, and there's huge tension between them. The other 2 are relative newcomers to the community. And so the dynamics are awkward at first. And one of the characters, one of the outsiders, said, let's go camping. And then what happens in the camping shifts the dynamics and they become tight friends. One of the characters' backstory, without giving too much away, means that she's hiding. She and her mother are hiding. And through the debate club, when the school goes to a competition, it reveals where she's living. And so, although the reader follows her, the 3 friends are left with, she disappeared one day. They don't know where she is, what's happened. They worry about her. And one character's a little ticked off. And then we follow them each, like they go their separate ways after high school, of course, and have shifted their original dreams somewhat, although one didn't. And then a series of catastrophic events happen, and they get back to, like, they find each other again through various means. And that's the part that I'm writing about. And I want to pick up on what you said about in your battles, like people, thousands of people sometimes die. And I had to take a month off my book because I painted myself in a corner because I couldn't bring myself, like the catastrophe is an earthquake and a tsunami, which is why the story takes place out west. And I couldn't figure out, I couldn't, I didn't think I was capable of describing the impact that would have on people. So I took a month off wondering whether I could write the book and how to kind of get out of that. And I found a way that I think works. We'll see what editors have to say about it. By focusing in one part on an individual and their experience as representing, sort of the people that don't make it. And it's kind of, in a way, uplifting and sad at the same time. And then the chaos of one of the main characters, as he's trying to get to unhoused people and figure out a solution to get them out of the way of this. And I also had to figure out how to give enough warning about an earthquake because there's no warning. The sensors that they have, oh, an earthquake's starting. And then a tsunami would happen with the big earthquake 20 minutes later. I had to resolve using fiction how there might be a little bit more warning so that people were being evacuated, because that's an essential part of the story. What happens to these unhoused people coming out of the earthquake?
Wow. Well, it really sounds
So it's a lot.
thrilling, moving. Just wow. It just sounds incredible. Just for the readers, I'm not sure if you're comfortable with giving away like the title. Is this going to be part of an ongoing series, like, things like that?
Well, you know me, I think it's one and done, which I thought about Spindrifts too, and um, it's an integral story. And the working title right now is Fugitive Rifts, Rifts, because there's themes of, earthquake rifts, personal rifts, other kinds of rifts that happen. And there are scenes where there's a bit of discussion or thinking about what does fugitive mean in science? What does fugitive mean to a police officer? What does it mean when somebody disappears because they had to flee? So that's the working title. I like it. I haven't seen other books with that combination. So it might be that. And it will resolve, and I think it'll be just one. I know you've told me you'd like me to write more drift ones. And I have a couple of short stories I should send you. They're quite rough. But one is when the elders, Alicia and Nide, first come onto that devastated land and the visions about the future. And I actually finally was able to write a little bit about the earth tipping. Um, so I'll ship those to you sometime soon. They're rough.
God.
They're rough because I don't know what to do with
Oh,
them.
I'd be so honored. I would absolutely love to read them. I love to read anything that you write, but I would absolutely love to read.
Yeah,
It's just such a compelling and fascinating world that you've
yeah.
created there, and obviously, I would love what you write in the future. This new novel sounds brilliant, but yeah, I found myself really wanting to know, um, you know, especially how we avoided the tipping point, like that part of your
Yeah.
world. And yeah, any short stories, I'm sure I would absolutely devour them. So I'm so oh, thank you so much. I'm so honored. I very much would love to.
So there's three short stories, and I'm thinking that maybe I could do a short story about certain ones of the characters, um, and it might come together then as um, short drifts or something like that. But we'll see. The current book is really taxing my creativity because I can picture some scenes and the crafting of them is challenging, and will require a lot more um, self editing and rewriting. Um, the scene where the person is, in a way, caught in the tsunami has to be really poignant and sad. And I've got it to a point where I'm getting closer. And then there's another scene that I just drafted, which I have to do more with. And I don't know how it quite all ends. Um, but I get glimpses and then I think, but you never know. And each of the characters has very harsh challenges through the book, where things happen unexpectedly and um, they have to find their way through it. Um, and some of those are clunky. I sort of have, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. And now I have to go back and craft them from a sketch to a beautiful watercolor painting with lots of layers. But we're getting there.
Oh, well, I can't wait. I know for me, I wrote my first short fiction this year for as part of an anthology, and it's coming out at some point. Yes, Shapers of Worlds anthology. And I found it very challenging because I'm used to writing these voluminous 400, 500,
Yes, yes, you
160
do.
to 200,000 word things, as you can see on the shelf behind me. And I found myself, oh, I have to limit myself to this much. I found it to be tough,
It is
right? I'm a
hard.
wordy guy as it is. So, but what I did find, it was also very liberating and very refreshing to write something that was kind of short, compressed, a little story. um, how do you find, AM, the difference between writing a bigger novel, like Ginger's, and short fiction? Do you find one or more challenging? Do you find one or more prefer? I realize I prefer writing longer books. Not that I don't enjoy writing the short fiction. I think it's something I would do more and more in the future. But how do you find the difference?
I find writing the full book a lot more engaging and challenging and creative. When I say my short stories are a bit rough, to me, they're sketches. One of them I wrote because there was a call that would fit that story. It didn't get accepted. Um, but I got a nice note back saying that they hoped it would go someplace else. And I thought, well, you were it, you know? Um, so to sit down and write, you know, a 10 to 15 page piece requires you to go from kind of a panoramic beginning all the way to the end to a focus, um, where you're zoning in on a story with intensity, fewer characters, one thing that happens that, you know, sort of tips off the story, and then you have to find a quick resolution. Um, to me, they're kind of fun to write, but then I put them aside and sort of forget about them. For me, it was with the two drift books. I regretted that at the time I didn't think I could write about when Mount Etna blew up. And then one morning I woke up and I thought, here it is. But both books had been published by then. So I just wrote it out for my own self. But now you can read it.
Yeah, like I said, I absolutely can't wait, and I'm sure your short fiction is going to be fabulous. A lot, you know, you're saying rough, you're very humble, but I'm sure it's going to be. I know you're saying that's the stage it's in, rather than
Yeah.
you're saying polished with, but I think it's still. I'm sure the concept and the writing is going to be great because you're a great writer. Um, what I know you said and I know we know each other well in terms of you're a pantser, I'm a plotter. There's room for both. It doesn't matter. The main thing is getting in the book out. And I know perhaps you don't make as many plans, perhaps the future of your writing as I do. But where do you think you're going with your writing in the future? Do you think you're going to continue to write novels? Are you going to focus more on shorts? Are you going to, you think, can you foresee a time when you don't write? Do you think you're going to write basically for the rest of the time you have? Where's your writing go? I know for me, I feel like there will come a time when I stop. If God grants me a long enough life, I can see, somewhere in my 70s. I started late. I think I have a mind. I have a number of a certain amount of books I'd like to write, and then when that's done, I think, I'll probably put things down. What about you? How do you feel about that?
So if you started late, I started a lot later. I started writing again from high school at age 68. I think that's right. Um, Spelldrifts was published the year I turned 70, and I'm over 70. So I know you have like about 15 books for your two series. Um, I don't have aspirations to keep writing that long. Um, I'm going to assess once I get Fugitive Rifts done. Um, I suspect I will then pay attention to revisiting my drift characters with short stories. And then I think I'll be done. But you never know. I thought I was done after Spindrifts. And then the granddaughter sat me down one day and said, you have to write another one with a dragon and with a wolf. And I thought, but that doesn't make sense for the world I built in Spindrifts. It took me quite a while to figure out how to do a book with those characters in it from the world of Spindrifts. And it took a lot of imagination and a huge lateral shift in my thinking about the world. Um, And having just reread it again, some of it I thought, I can't believe I did that, you know? Um, so you just never know how long it'll be.
Yeah, well, I can say I'm grateful that you continue to write. I'm loving everything that you're writing. You're such a brilliant writer. Um, can you quickly give us more or less an overview of your drifts series and the world? I was remiss. That's my fault. I didn't set that up. I didn't frame ask you to frame that. Essentially, what that series is about.
Um, the series is about an intergenerational family, um, who the oldest are pioneers who took totally devastated land the way Sudbury was, um, and had a vision probably around the 1980s, which is when our Sudbury protocols started to rehabilitate. And it's a microcosm of what they developed for all over the world. Um, and in the first book, the center, the tension is around what Fania, who comes to us at age 15 as the story begins, she hasn't found her place. She doesn't know what she wants to do, but she wants it to be as big and as impressive as all her family members, older family members, what they've accomplished. And her mood goes up and down, and then things start happening, and she finds her path. The second book takes place 20 years later. Fania's younger sister, Nuna, is a gifted phenon singer and is discovered at a young age and travels the world singing about the Earth Project to inspire people. Then 20 years later, um, some of the older characters are no longer with us. And um, Fania and Nuna have two children each. And the story focuses on their journey to find what they're going to do. And it's a very different world um, than the Spindrift's world. Uh, but at the end of Spindrift's, um, there's a vision that articulates how the world was going to change. And when I started Spindrifts, I went back and read, or Spelldrifts, I went back and read Spindrifts, and I thought, oh, I've already figured out how you get a dragon there in a way through that vision. And I couldn't believe that that vision was something I was capable of writing about. Because when I did that vision in Spindrifts, I told myself, well, I could never create a book out of that, so I'm done. And it turns out I could.
I guess the young people are prophetic in terms of maybe she saw something in reading Spindrift's that just made her believe that you were more than capable of bringing those two elements, those two creatures out in a future book. So
Yeah.
but that's amazing. That just fascinating that that's what happened.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It's if they hadn't told me I had to write another book, I'm not sure I would have. Um, in the Drift series, I might have, the one I'm writing now might have come to me, or short stories, but yeah, they inspired me. And I have to say also, PL, you telling me every time we're in contact that I need to write more Drift books because you love being in that world, that inspires me too. So thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's the truth. As I said, I so look up to you as a person, but also as an author. So, and you've certainly inspired me in my writing. You're one of the people that's inspired me in my
Oh,
writing.
I love your writing from the first one, and then you leave us on a cliffhanger, and like I'm waiting for the next one. For the first time, I think I have an idea where we're going, um, but just a little bit of it, not the depth that you always write. And I think my favorite one is Lion's Pride. I love them all, but because that one focused a lot on women in your stories, and you did such a good job of that.
Oh, well, thank you. Again, I look up to you and you're one of my inspirations. And, I think I'm sure you feel the same. You're one of the people in my audience that I write for. You write for, as small as my audience is, I'm so grateful for them. I'm so grateful for the people who appreciate my work, and you're one of them. And you also, you write for yourself, you write the book you want to write, but I think most authors also write for those who they appreciate liking their work, and I'm so happy that was something that you enjoyed. Like you, I strive for continuous improvement. I want to make each book better. Obviously, people are going to have their personal preferences and favorites first on based on what they like to read, but certainly like you, I'm striving for continuous improvement. So
And haven't we met a really wonderful network of writers
yes.
through social media? Um, you, you have more followers than I do, but there's a core of people that we both relate to. And it's such an uplifting, supportive community. It's awesome.
Yeah, it is incredible. Along with the Anochsaks and the Eve Kojuts and there's so many we can name, Kelly Millers
Yeah.
that, are just they're just pillars of the community. Yourself, I count you obviously as one of those. And, it is, through those highs and those lows, you can always turn to your friends, along with your family to help you get through, what is a very rewarding but challenging craft, right? And I did want to talk to you also about, I know what my challenges are with writing. I have, part of it is still working full time and having a busy life, and I'm not complaining. I'm very grateful for it. But, I would love to just be able to just sit back and write full time. I can't tell you how many books I could probably get out a year if I could just exclusively devote myself to writing. Um, but God willing, that time will come. In 6.5 years or so when I retire. But I know that for me, every book came with its challenges. For example, I think with The Last of the Atlanteans, my second book, it was imposter syndrome. How do I make this better than a Drowned Kingdom? How do I follow this up? How do I
Mm.
improve? Have I really improved? Was this all just a fluke? I managed to spit out a decent book and now I won't be able to repeat it. I know with this book, it was I'm currently writing book 5, A Pack of Wolves, the Drakim Saga. I know for this book, I had, my wonderful father-in-law passed away suddenly this year, and it kind of threw me for a loop. And my focus, my concentration wasn't always there. It's back now, and Vines, A Pack of Wolves is taking going along, to a point where I can't wait till you read it, and I'm honored that you're going
Mm.
to be one of the people kind of reading and providing a quote. But I know I've had my challenges with writing, and it's not just about writer's block sometimes and things like that. There's all kinds of challenges you can. What are some of the challenges that you feel that if you want to share, that you've overcome with your writing?
I'm going to start in a different, I will get to that. First of all, I don't know how you have time in every day to do everything you are doing because you're working, you're doing this, you're writing, you're very often out and about with your books. Like you leave me breathless with how busy you are. Um, I'm currently having a writing challenge, and it comes from my almost 40 years as an academic, where an academic writes very factually. My first book was, the first draft was like I was writing an academic paper, and I had lots of helpful editors that guided me through that. Um, and then the other influence that makes my writing in the first draft a challenge is, for a number of years in my career, I worked in a second language, French, um, almost exclusively. And my sentence structure, when I'm just writing off the top of my head, is a French sentence structure. So I wouldn't say the red dress, it would be the dress that is the color of red. And then I'm still, when I go back and looking, I'm thinking red pen and shift it around. The challenge I'm facing now, because my two previous books were in a society where everybody was expected to kind of be on an even keel. So even when they were in conflict, there wasn't any major drama except in a couple of moments. And this one requires a lot of emoting and the characters emoting. And it's a challenge for me to get them from being practical and sensible and all that to the kind of feelings that they need to express. And I'm partway there, but I'm not all the way there yet. So that's one of the challenges. I'm trying to reflect on, okay, I know the feelings I want to express. When did I feel that? Or when did I see somebody go through that? And what was that like? Without redoing that actual situation, which doesn't fit what's happening in the book. Um, so that's a struggle. Um, I don't have the struggle to find the time because I'm retired, and although I do have certain responsibilities, I can say I have to write this week. I'm going to write in these time periods, and I can do that. I have a wonderful partner, Dave, who is a wonderful cook, and he'll peek in and say, "Can you come and eat?" And usually by then I'm pretty spent. Um, so I have pretty good conditions for writing, but it's the challenge of dealing in this new book with, as I said, unlike you who can slaughter thousands on the field, I can't bring myself to find the words to describe what that would be like. So I've done a way of getting most people out of the way through evacuations. And I'm not sure yet that that's going to work. Um, I'm getting better at people, like one couple of people getting mad or feeling excited and getting that expressed. But it requires me a lot to look for synonyms because, you know, feelings that we express tend to be limited in the words we use. But when we're writing and reading, we need to have a lot more than happy, sad, angry kind of words. So, yeah, those are my challenges. I don't think I could have written fiction when I was working because that was all consuming. The life of an academic is not a 9 to 5 lifestyle.
No, and I so respect you for that. And and I so respect you for being able to become such an accomplished writer in that next phase after your working career, because that's not easy either, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are much more interested, kind of like putting their feet up, and you know, whether that's just working in their garden or just traveling or doing whatever, but that this you're taking on a major endeavor, and that's incredible. So kudos to you. I applaud you for it.
Oh,
And
thank you.
I do hope you keep writing, because again, I love your work and you are an inspiration to me. And yeah, I like everybody else, I have challenges, but it's like I said, I don't complain because it's also very fulfilling, right? It's also
Mm-hmm.
very rewarding, and I am looking forward to slowing down a bit. I'm looking forward to just be able to focus on just one thing. And I've had a great career, and I'm not saying my career is I love it and everything, but yeah, I'm ready for that next stage. And but I think as writers, if we continue to overcome these challenges, the results can be spectacular.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you know
It, it's interesting as you're heading up to as one heads up to retirement for about the last, say, 7 years. I've noticed that there are people that, well, I don't want to retire. What would I do? Blah, blah, blah. And there are others who say, I have lots I want to do, and I love my job, but I want to get to things I don't have time to do. I'm pretty sure you've already figured out you'll have lots to do in your retirement, and you're not nervous about
no
having nothing to do.
no I cannot wait for retirement. If I could retire now, I would, but Deb and I, we still have two young ones in university, so but yeah, I cannot wait, and I cannot wait to devote myself to my writing. I have
Yeah.
roughly 20 books planned in my universe, and now I think there'll be some short stories on top of that in there. And I'd love to just be able to get up and plan my day according to how many words I can get on a page, rather than have to get up early in the morning and shower and get dressed and pack a lunch and get ready and head down the road, head down the 401. That's why the 400.
And
So
the work is a distraction. Any kind of work is a different part of the brain, so it takes a while to get back into the writing and creating zone um,
yeah.
after work, unless somebody's a professional artistic painter or musician. But the rest of us, it requires more logic and thinking and doing than creating.
No, I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And quickly, just can you talk about, um, as we wind down here, what are some of your influences? You've had a long academic career. You've obviously you're extremely well read, both fiction, nonfiction. But what kind of books have inspired you to write now as a fiction author? What are some of the books that you've looked to? Some of the authors that have inspired you to write?
That's really hard for me to answer because when I'm not writing, I'm reading. And even at my busiest in my work life, I still read 3 or 4 hours when I got home. And I would read like 2 or 3 books a week. And in times when I wasn't working, I'd read a book a day. So to figure out which of those inspired me is a bit of a challenge. Um, One of the books that, when I read it, had a major impact. It's a book called, what is it called? something about, oh, I can't remember the title of it, but it's a book that when you start, you picture the road. No, I can't remember the title of it. When you start, um, it's a very patriarchal, violent society, and the women are protected. They're inside this encampment. And the men go out and wage war with other factions around, and a whole bunch of them die. But then when you enter further into the world, it's a bit like archaeology. There's a lot more going on in that world where the women actually are controlling everything. So when the men are getting restless, they'll connect with women in other worlds and say, let's get them going fighting, sort of, and then we're home doing other things. And they actually have peaceful men who are their true partners, despite what the war makers think. And the goal in that book, it's a good thing I don't know the title because it would ruin it for everybody. The goal in that book is all the aggressive men eventually are going to die off and their world will be peaceful. And so when you start the book, you think, holy Hannah, I don't know if I can read this. So for me, it was informative about, at the beginning, it might not be what's really going on. And, that's sort of part of my inspiration for some things in my books. The other author who informed me is Wab Rice, who's also from Sudbury and a phenomenal Indigenous writer who's been really supportive of me. We haven't met either. And his two books take place, the first book takes place in one place. And it's futuristic. And I kept wanting to move my characters out of the place in Spindrift's. And I kept going back to, Wab wrote that book and everybody stayed there. People came in. The people who left were never heard of again. The story took place in one small community. And so every time I wanted to have people travel out, for instance, when Nuna went off to the academy, I wanted people to go with her the first time. And then I thought, no, that's out there. We stay in here. And we hear about her and she comes back and we hear what she's doing. His second book in that series, they travel south to look for a different place to live and figure out what happened 20 years or 10 years, 20 years before. And that story has helped me with my new book, where there is movement. People are moving to other places and seeking, their place in the world. So I have to say that Wab's world building and the way people are situated in terms of place have been informative to me. And I'm hoping there's a third book in his series.
Phenomenal. Phenomenal. Wow, the time goes by so fast. I don't know where it goes. It just, we could talk for hours.
Wow. Yeah.
It's already an hour and 24 minutes. I want to respect your time. You've been so generous with it. Thank you so much for joining me, AM. It just means so much, and I'm still looking forward to the day when we can meet in person. Hopefully, that will happen quite soon. Can you, as we sign off, can you provide any where people can find you on social media, where people come buy your books, any of your preferred platforms, etc.?
So I am on Twitter with the handle at AM MAWHINEY. I'm on Instagram, AM, well, AM MAWHINEY. I'm on Threads. I've been there a little less lately. I do have a YouTube that isn't very active, and I have a website that's ammawhinney.ca. And there are links to stores on that website. You can get my books through almost any online bookstore internationally. I've had sales in Germany, the UK, Scotland, France, Australia, the United States, and a couple of others that don't come to mind right now. And locally in Sudbury, there are several outlets as well. So really, if you Google my name, you'll find lots of places where you would be able to buy spindrifts and spelldrifts. Friesen Press, of course, sells them. And I would recommend that as a place for people living in Canada and the United States.
Yeah, and all those links are going to be in the description of this video, there, sister. So you can check those out if you'd like to buy AM's books and find out more about her. So, AM, once again, I just want to thank you for appearing. It's been so wonderful to see you again. As always, can't wait to be talking to you in the future. Can't wait to read not only shorts, but your new book. Really looking forward to it. Sounds exciting. And anxious to see, what you think about my next book, A Pack of Wolves, because you'll be one of the people providing the quotes. So
yes, I'm looking forward.
And but once again, this has been Six Elementals interviews on my channel, and my guest has been the wonderful AM MAWHINEY. Thanks so much, everyone who tuned in and watched the live, and those of you who will watch later. It's because of you. You're what makes this type of long form content amazing. So thank you so much, everyone. We're signing off, and we will talk to you next time.
Thanks, PL.
Thank you so much.